and a very warm welcome to the Crash MotoGP Podcast, episode 26. And, well, where to start? When you look back at any championship run, there are certain defining moments. And I think this weekend in Misano certainly defined all three championship classes, with drama happening left, right, and centre. However, we do have a new MotoGP world champion in the form of Fabio Quartararo, the first ever Frenchman to take the title. He didn't make it too easy for himself, starting so far back on the grid, but with Pecco Bagnaia spectacularly crashing out from the lead, Fabio's crown was secured as he finished just off the podium in fourth. Plenty to discuss, and that's just in MotoGP. We'll get on to the twists of Moto2 and Moto3 as well, with those championships still to be decided. But first, Pete McLaren, Keith Huewen, have you caught your breath yet?
Well, only just from my case. I can't speak for Pete, of course, but he always was a bit more relaxed than me anyway. I've got to say, it was a track that done it, mate, wasn't it? At the end of the day, I mean, only wet and cold testing, free practice qualifying. We know that the Yamaha isn't particularly wonderful in those conditions. I mean, I love that meme that turned up on Twitter at some stage. They're in a paddling pool, and there's the face that's now over the instructor being Zarco helping his student, that is Quartararo, that's almost drowning on his bodyboard in the pool. Anyone that's not seen that is quite funny. And of course, that's what we were all worried about, that the weather would continue through, or rather the Yamaha camp were worried about, that it would continue through to Sunday. And Quartararo, not only would he be starting from an extremely poor position, he'd probably end up there. As it happens, I think the mark of his championship for me has been how cool he is at such a young age. He's been a very cool customer, and he's definitely got the most out of that Yamaha just about on every occasion. This weekend, I felt really sorry for Bagnaia. It was a long shot anyway that he was going to be able to do anything about the championship. But if he took it to Portimao, it could have been cold and wet. If he takes it to Valencia, it could have been cold and wet. There were circumstances for these final three Grand Prix where, it might have just fell in the lap of Ducati. And I think that's the only hope that they really had for finishing up with the Riders' Championship. Quartararo, though, he rode a really, really good race at the end of the day. I think Ducati were out in force. What was that? Was that the first front row ever for Ducati? 3 Ducatis across the front row. I think it was the first ever front row for a lockout for Ducati, which was a big deal in itself. First of all, his teammate chucks it down the road. Jack was riding shotgun for Bagnaia when he was out in front. He couldn't keep the ever apparent Marquez. There's another big story. A few weeks off and a little bit of fitness, despite the fact he went sort of trying to throw himself over the handlebars during the course of the weekend. He still was fitter than he's been for some considerable time. A 1-2 for Repsol Honda. Pol Espargaro finishing on the podium in the middle as well. I mean, how many stories do you want to talk about first, Pete? Help me.
And Bastianini on the podium.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And who was it who actually bet on Bastianini out of us three? One of you two.
It was Pete.
Clever bugger.
And I also bet on Quartararo. So, I was hoping that I thought I might have to introduce some team orders on that last lap because it was getting a bit close, wasn't it?
Just a bit.
But Pete, honestly, where to look first? Obviously, the headline is Fabio Quartararo, and if we just stick with that overarching championship title for the moment, it really has been, the making. A lot of people comparing Fabio to his title fight last year, and how there was he was a lot more aggravated, throwing arms up in the air. He wasn't quite as mentally stable perhaps this year, though. Almost no sign of that. So it just shows how far he's come and developed, hasn't he? And is this the beginning of perhaps dominance that we're going to see from Quartararo?
The funny thing with Fabio's career is not that he's as good as he is now, it's that he wasn't this good sooner. He was a megastar before he arrived in Grand Prix. Double CEV champion, following in the footsteps of Marc Marquez. He was labelled as the next Marc Marquez. He rode for the same Estrella team, managed by Al Zamora, just as Marc Marquez was. So everybody expected him to arrive in Grand Prix and win everything. And he didn't. Until 2019, he'd never even finished in the top 9 in the World Championship. That first MotoGP season. So it all went wrong for him. He swapped teams, he swapped management, I think nearly every season in Grand Prix he's had a different team before he got to MotoGP. So it's very rare. I can't think of an example of someone with a career like that, where they start off so hyped. That's not unusual. But to then drop away and then come back again, in the way that he has done. And as he said, it's those lows that have really helped him. Now he's put everything together. He's got a good, stable management around him, his friends and family, all the right people that he needs. And he's delivering what we thought he would do years ago, if you like. So, as you say, this year, to sum up, what changed between last year and this year, he said, look, the front end of the Yamaha is a lot better this year. Keith was saying previously how important that is to a motorcycle racer. He can overtake now. He's got confidence, and we saw that in the race today. And also, as you say, he's not getting angry. And he said he's had to learn. He said last year, he gave the example, I think, Valencia last year, the bike wasn't working, as it wasn't for most of the Yamaha riders. And he came back to the pits and he's fuming about the bike. It's not braking, it's not turning, it's not accelerating. And his crew chief says, okay, we'll work on that, but you've got to tell us exactly what it's doing. Don't just say it's no good. And he said he's remembered that and he's taken that into this year. And he's always tried to, even when things are not working out, he's trying to give the team the information they need to get things going in the right direction. And I think all of that has contributed to his fantastic consistency this year. Dovizioso, again, we were asking him, what he thinks about Quartararo, because obviously he's on the Yamaha for these last few races. He said it's something crazy is what he's done this year, was what Dovi said. That consistency, that ability to brake late. And then he said everything comes from the braking. Because Fabio's so good at the braking, the rest of the corner is just perfect. And he's so consistent time and time again. And 22 years old and now a MotoGP champion. And you wouldn't bet against him, being a multiple champion in the next few years. And let's face it, I think we're all sort of eyeing up the big fight with a returning to his best Marc Marquez in the near future as well.
Mark was lining himself up for the win anyway this weekend. There's no doubt about that. And we keep hearing about how he loves anti-clockwise tracks. On a clockwise track, he did what he did today. Rah, 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 rah. He's good on anything that he gets on. And I think that the fact that he'd had that little bit of time, extra time, he was there or thereabouts anyway. It looked like Bagnaia had got the better of him in the end, as Mark may have faded very slightly. Bagnaia's so strong. There are a couple of them front-end crashes that's so difficult to... You can't do anything. You can't legislate for it. You can't do anything about them. When you get a front end crash, Raul Fernandez in the Moto2, Bagnaia in MotoGP, those kind of smoking, juicing, locked up front ends, bang, down you go, faceplant. Not a lot you can do about them normally. We've seen Mark save a few of them in his pomp, but I think he'd have been finding it fairly hard to have saved one of them this weekend as well. But the track was... They'd got the data they needed because they've obviously been there before, but it was miles colder this time. It was 9 degrees or something, wasn't it, for warm up this morning? It was ridiculous. It was really, really cold out there. Damp patches all over the place. It's very difficult to find your pace in those circumstances with any kind of safety involved in it. You just got to go for it. And when a championship's at stake, Bagnaia, I thought he'd got it. Not least because I know I'd got him to win with Marquez second. Good job there's not money on it, or I'd be crying in my bucket right now.
I think I'd be joining you with that as well. I had Miller in. I think I cursed him. But on Bagnaia, it was an outside chance that he could take the title. Quartararo has been, the dominant force and the bookie's favourite. But Bagnaia is certainly not giving up without a fight. Keith, how is he going to be feeling, do you think, now, having lost it in this? So I saw he came out and said, it was win or gravel. So do you think he's probably actually satisfied with his run?
I think philosophically, yes, of course he's got to be, and the team have got to be. The circumstances were that Quartararo had got one hand on the trophy for some time, and it was up to Quartararo to make the mistake. I still feel that Quartararo would have won the championship come what may, but it would have been something where we would have seen what Quartararo was made of when we got to Portimao and Valencia if he was still under pressure. Pressure is everything. It makes riders, Remy Gardner, again, an analogy going back to Moto2. Remy Gardner's under a lot of pressure at the moment. And he was making mistake after mistake to the point where he had Somkiat Chantarov, gained himself a ride-through penalty for that, and he was lucky that's all he got as well in those circumstances. And you could tell the pressure he was under, and he was making mistakes. He looked ragged here, there, and everywhere. But as soon as Raul Fernandez fell down and was out of the consideration for the win here, it meant that Remy could settle then for a moment or two, and he goes in now with an 18-point lead into the final two rounds. Pressure makes all the difference. how Quartararo would have managed that if we'd have gone to Valencia and had a shootout in Valencia would have been a very, very interesting weekend indeed. We're not going to get that now. We've got 2 races where he can enjoy himself as the first Frenchman, as you've already said in the build-up. Which, do you know what? When everybody keeps saying that, I have to search my brain because I can't work out why we've never had a French world champion before in the Premier class, because there's been so many good French riders over the time. The French are so big on their Premier class motorbikes, MotoGP or 500cc before back in my day. And it's almost stunning, Pete, that's a stat that I can't actually believe, even though I know it's true.
You're right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you saw Zarco as well. He was one of the first because he understood what it means for French motorsport. He was one of the first to congratulate Fabio, wasn't he? Because it's a massive thing for them, and they've been waiting an incredibly long time. On Bagnaia, he was asked, when do you think you lost the championship apart from today's mistake? And he said, well, really, if you look at Mugello, where I fell off, I had the tyre problems in Austria 1 and in Silverstone. He said that all of that added together. But he said, look, to be honest, last year I had 2 good races. I came into this year expecting to build, to learn, to get better. I didn't expect to fight for the title. So in a way, he's a long way ahead of what he expected. And he has sort of outdone expectations in that sense. Now, it is a shame that today, let's be honest, only Jack and Pecco went for the hard front tyre. Now, Valentino Rossi, and Keith brought this up before, when you're the only guy that goes for a tyre choice, you need to be sure about it. And Valentino Rossi brought this up before. We mentioned the story at Aragon where he tried to hypnotise Bagnaia into taking the safe tyre choice, and he'd taken it and he won his first race in Aragon. He tried it again today. He said, medium. You're the fastest guy. Medium. It's the safe choice. He went with the hard front. Obviously, it's not Bagnaia's choice alone. He would have been advised by the team, by Michelin and everything else. But that meant that he couldn't back off. As Bagnaia said, he couldn't afford to back off because the moment he backed off, the tyre, it was cooling down. The track conditions that Keith has spoken about meant it was so treacherous, but eventually he got caught out. And Rossi said, I'm a little bit angry with him today because, if he'd have had the medium, Rossi's sure he would have won it and it would have been the safer choice. But, and Jack Miller also sort of went, well, when 2 guys have the hard front tyre and they both fall off with identical accidents at the same corner, you have to take it on the chin that it wasn't the right choice.
Yeah, and it will have been the rider that made the choice in the end. At the end of the day, I mean, the team will have advised, but it would have been the rider that did it. And maybe he was influenced by Jack's choice. Jack is a little bit more edgy when it comes to tyre choice, I would feel. So it might have been a bit of an influencing factor. I don't know. My teammate's thinking about the same thing as I'm thinking about. So therefore, they both thought themselves down the wrong road. But although having said that as well, it was building slightly. The temperature in the track was above 20 degrees. It was starting to get into a reasonable place. And that, it could have worked for them. But again, nobody had any mileage on any tyres this weekend at the end of it all. It's not, you have the data from the previous Misano 1, as it's known, Misano 2 being this one. But the temperature is just, and the track was in just a different configuration, if you like, in a different zone is the word I'm looking for. Bad luck, but at the end of the day, Quartararo's got it done. 2 rounds to go. We can enjoy a bit of a demonstration from the Frenchman from now on without the pressure. Something you said in your build-up, Harry, that are we going to see some dominance from you? I don't think anybody's going to dominate anymore. I don't think, if Marquez comes back to the kind of level that he was at, maybe he can rekindle that kind of dominance. But I just don't see it anymore. I don't see that dominating factor in there anymore. I don't see any. They're all everything is so close, and all the riders are so close at the moment. I can't see. I think we can see a proper dogfight from round 1 in 2022 right the way through to the end, with a bit of luck for us now as spectators and fans. But don't know. I just don't see that dominance. And we've got. Incidentally, I did speak to Danny Aldridge about the technical freeze that we've had and whether they were going to extend whether there's going to be any leeway moving into next year. No, it's going to be exactly the same as it's always been. Once we get into Qatar and we've got the spec that they're using, that's it for the year. Anyone that's not got concessions. So if they've got, whatever A, B, C, D motor, whichever one they choose to go with the year, that's the one what they've got for the rest of the year. There is not going to be any extra testing. There's not going to be any extra anything. No time or consideration towards that. So I think next year is going to be quite a tricky one as well, because we've got obviously new motors that will be coming. We've been seeing little changes chassis-wise, aero-wise, and all the rest of it. And they're only allowed the one aero change as well next year. So if you've got what you've got, you're allowed that one at whatever time that you want it per rider. So you can sort of mix it up a bit in your team, if you like. If you've got 2 riders, or in Ducati's case, you've got 8 riders, I think it is next year. And I have to say, inspired, Pete, with Bastianini. I mean, we knew that he was coming good and looking good, but that move that he put on Quartararo, Quartararo wasn't the first move that Bastianini did on him, where he passed him into the hairpin. That was legit. It made Quartararo jump. Of course it did. It always does when you suddenly got a front wheel under you. But it was the next bit that frightened the life out of me, when Quartararo looked to see if he could get back under him again. It's a normal racer's reaction. You try and snap straight back. You know, the guy that's come under you is going to run a little wide, so you straight away aim at the gap but Quartararo, he really only just caught himself there, because it looked like he was going to ram the back of Bastianini's bike, and we could have ended up with both your title contenders down on the floor, and the status quo going into Portimao, which wouldn't have been great for Quartararo, that's for sure.
Slightly awkward situation for Ducati is that Bastianini is due to get the 21 bike next year, and of course the pressure is building to get him on the 22 bike. As you were saying, Keith, there's going to be 8 Ducatis. They can't give everyone a 22
Why
bike.
not?
And at the moment, that they say they don't have the money. I don't know, but at the moment, both Gresini bikes will be 21s. I think one of the VR46s will be 21s. Marini's will be a 22, but. If Bastianini can repeat these results of the last few races, it's going to be difficult to turn that down.
Let me ask you something, Pete. I mean, I know I should have done my homework on this, and I haven't, so I'll take the smack for that straight away off of Harry. But are the Ducati guys contracted to Ducati, all of them, or are some or to the teams? And that makes a big difference, doesn't it? I mean, what they can do as far as, obviously it can influence an independent team because they're supplying them with motorbikes, but if that rider is contracted to the team rather than Ducati, then Ducati got their hands tied a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a mix. So you've got Bastianini is contracted to Ducati. He's one of the riders that is. Marini is I think he might be contracted to Ducati as well. But Di Gianantonio, for example, at Gresini, he was contracted to Gresini. But yeah, most of the Ducati guys are. Zarco, all of the Pramac guys, all the factory guys. So most of them are. And in Bastianini's case, yeah, he is. At the moment, he says he's due to get the 21 bike with all of the latest parts on it. But, as you were just saying about the lack of testing, once they get to Qatar, that's the moment. So until then, he's got hope, hasn't he? Because whatever bike they give him then, that's the bike he's going to have to keep. So, he's got plenty of time to keep sort of building his case, if you like, with Ducati, and maybe try and get that 22 bike, because on the face of the last couple of races, he deserves it.
He does.
Bastianini with a inspired ride, wasn't it, to finish third on the podium. We talked about, there may not be such dominance with riders next year, but if we just switch to the manufacturer side of things and just going off something you tweeted earlier, Keith, Yamaha, British Superbikes, MotoGP, potentially World Superbikes, but they've got this huge influx of Ducati power coming for next year as well. It's going to be a tight fight again, or Yamaha got this in the bag?
It's a funny old thing, isn't it? I mean, like, the Yamaha is not the best motorbike in strict speaking terms. But it seems to be the best general motorbike overall over a season. It seems to work relatively well everywhere. I mean, Yamaha at the moment, they won the British Superbike title. Clearly, it was Ducati finished second. It should have been a 1-2 really in the BSB, but in the end, Ducati snuck in there in Tommy Bridewell's hands. World Superbike, I think Top Rack will get it done. It looks like that. The American Series, obviously, done. Super Sport Series done. Yamaha actually on a piece of paper, when you're looking motor course or something at the end of the year, there's going to be blue Yamaha all over it everywhere, because they're having an absolutely stunning year, really, for a factory that I've been quite critical of in the way that they seem to go about their business, but they get their business done, and I don't quite work it out. It's been a long time, though. I mean, Lynn Jarvis was quite interesting when he was interviewed on TV this afternoon, wasn't he? Jorge Lorenzo was their last world champion. I mean, we've got to go back a long time. And to see Jorge trackside and congratulating, it was quite fun. And that was the other thing for me. I mean, like, bloody kids nowadays, 22 years old, Quartararo. How many languages does he speak? He speaks fluent Spanish to Lorenzo. I had no clue what he was saying because obviously I'm a dim old British guy. But there he is. He's conversing with Lorenzo, the former Yamaha world champion. And you just think to yourself, these kids are just so far ahead of things nowadays. When we're moving into an era where that's going to be slowed down. And that, obviously, with respect to the losses we've had this year in various classes, in various countries, young riders have been killed, that something had to be done about that. So what's happened is obviously the FIM and with IRTA and Dorna and all the other various regions have come together with this scheme where we raised the minimum age, which is absolutely right. I mean, I don't know how we ever got to racing 14-year-olds in the first place, to be honest. There are so many other disciplines that you can be involved in at that age and still go to school and concentrate on your schoolwork and do the things that you still need to do, because there's only going to be a very small percentage of people that are ever going to earn enough money to sustain them and their families throughout the year through racing. The chances of them failing or getting injured fairly early in their careers and thereby having to be a plumber, which I've got nothing against plumbers, obviously. In fact, I think I'd rather be a plumber. They earn more money than I do. It's the truth of the matter. But the point being is that it gives a kid options. It gives a family options. A family having to drag their child to Spain to race in Spain, to have to fund a youngster in whatever championship it is that is going to give you the best ladder into MotoGP, presumably, but sometimes World Superbikes if you kind of fade a little bit. I think that takes away that ridiculous tension. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, I've got 4 kids here. The fact of the matter is they seem like they're very mature. They seem like they've really got it covered at 15, 16, but they really haven't. There's occasions where you catch them out on stuff that in life that they just are not yet equipped with to make that decision, to sort of go that extra bit. And personal safety, I have to say, and this is from my own experience, is bottom of the list. Are you going to jump off that dirty great bridge into the river when you're 12 or 13? Of course you are. Are you going to ride a motorbike flat out around the field with no helmet on? In my day, yeah, you did. Nowadays, of course, they are a bit sharper than that. But you're going to do all these daft things. That's how it is when you're growing up. You need to almost slow that down a little bit when we get to these championships that are running 14, 15, 16-year-olds in. I just think that raising the age to 18 in Moto3, I think it is, Pete. I know you'll probably be able to give us the absolute on this. I think that's so the right thing to do. I really, really do. It's the minimum thing to do, by the way. You touched on the education thing, Peter, before, and I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, well, racers will be racers kind of thing, which probably is the wrong attitude to take. And it's probably a good job I'm not trying to influence anybody, but I think that there is probably a fair argument that should also be a major part of the trip to your 18-year-old before you get to the World Championships, perhaps, as well. Needs to be attacked from all sides, Pete.
It does, yeah. As you say, there was sort of 3 main points announced, wasn't it? There was the age limit and the grid numbers, as you rightly say, 18 for Grand Prix racing, 17 if you're the CEV champion or the Red Bull Rookies champion. So, we might have 1 or maximum 2 riders that might be 17, but that'll be it. And then there's the protection. They want to look at the chest and neck protection area. They think there might be some more that can be done there. And finally, this automatic warning system, that, which is interesting technology that they're looking. We don't know exactly how that's going to work yet, but they want to have a system up and running for testing next year. So we've spoken about it before, the options that they could use, whether they use sensors on the bike or whether they use the airbag technology in some way is the trigger for this or not. But yeah, they're attacking it from all sides with that. What we haven't seen is any technical rule changes, which you've spoken about before, things like the bikes and the gearing, for example. But as we know, technical changes take longer because they have to be agreed by the manufacturers, don't they? So we might yet see some more things that will come out later if the manufacturers agree. But these were things that Dorna and the FIM can just agree kind of at the snap, themselves without taking all the time to get all of the manufacturers involved.
Once momentum is behind it, though, Once there is that consensus that's across the board, I mean, you're right. The manufacturers, that FIM or IRTA have autonomy to do what they like with the rules in certain respects, but when it comes to technical stuff, no, they don't. It's they've agreed with the manufacturers to take it as a large group. But I think once we've got this kind of momentum moving, and we have this general consensus of that we've got to do more than the bare minimum. I'm actually surprised to some extent, and again, this might be my slight lack of respect for officialdom in that, I'm really surprised and extremely pleased that they've made the move quickly, and they've graduated it over a period of time. I think they've done well to do that as quick as they have done. I think they had to do it. They've brought it will bring the sport into disrepute. You can't have anybody killed effectively. You're trying to maximize safety, minimize risk and injury as much as you can. And yet at the same time, we've had 4 kids that I know of this year that have lost their lives, which, in any situation, if you're not taking that bloody seriously, then your sport is in disrepute. So they've moved as quick as they should have done, but quicker than I thought they would have done.
And I think also, I know there's some people that say, the age limit, it doesn't reflect the maturity of the riders, and there's lots of other factors involved. But at the end of the day, raising the age limit is not going to make the sport more dangerous. So everyone can agree on that it's sometimes when rules are changed, you can get unintended consequences, can't you? But we know for sure this can only make things better. It's not going to make things worse. It's just how much it makes things better, and that's what we'll have to see.
And the thing that it's one of my bugbears, really, living in Britain, of course, for the slightly more global audience that we have here on Crash, it might not make quite the same impact, but we mature and start and get funded much later in the UK. So to actually have a situation where you're not already out of date by the time you get to where you get to is a big deal from a British youngster's point of view as well. There are very few that are funded anything like they need to be in this country. So to move that scale up a little bit by a couple of years, 3 years, it makes a big difference to a country like this. And I'm sure there are others that might be feeling the same on that one. So the fact that the Brits mature later, or in my case, not at all, then I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, that was actually brought up, Keith, in the official press release. They did actually mention that, and I did think of you when I saw that, because you have mentioned that before. So it does sort of even things up for, let's say, maybe the non-European nationalities that want to get into racing. It gives them a little bit more time, because it's a big deal to fly certainly across the world, isn't it? I know for England or the UK, you've just got to go to Europe to race maybe, but if you're coming from Australia, if you're coming from South Africa, places like that, it's a big deal to do that at 15, 16, and this just gives few more years.
It's brilliant to see, as you say, Keith, that action being taken swiftly and quickly, because I think the pressure was mounting, and it will be very interesting to see how that all unfolds and what more is done in the coming months. If you want the full breakdown of everything that's being involved, there's a great article on crash.net. So do check that out if you get a moment. Back to the racing action, I think it would be remiss of us not to touch on our 1-2. Of course, we have teased around the subject of Marc Marquez, back-to-back wins. He can do it now, right hand and left hand. He's back to normal, is he?